up to get us kicked off on our panel activities is our Executive Director for Marketing and Communications, Captain USN retired Scott Girk. Scott's a Naval Academy grad, President of the Class of '86. Scott, come on up and get us going here. Thank you.
I can't miss this opportunity for a quick shout out to my oldest son Bill and the Bear Sharks of 25th Company. Bear Sharks. And youngest son Brian and the Centurions of 16th Company. Both members of the class of 2013. Thank you for being here today with your fellow midshipmen. During the past 10 years of combat operations around the world, we have witnessed the rapid rise in importance of unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs. So for today's conference, especially with all the midshipmen here, we thought it appropriate to ask the question, what will today's midshipmen be flying? We've therefore assembled a panel of experts to help us look into the future and attempt our best answer to this question. I would now like to ask our panelists to come forward. Commander Dave Bio Baranek, U.S. Navy retired. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Huber, United States Marine Corps. And Professor Robert Barney Rubel, a retired Navy captain. Moderating today's panel is Mr. Hill Goodspeed, historian and artifact collections manager at the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida. Besides having a really cool name for an expert in naval aviation, Mr. Goodspeed is the author and editor of 5 books, including U.S. Naval Aviation, which Proceedings magazine named one of the notable naval books of 2001. He has also appeared frequently as a commentator on PBS, the Discovery Channel, and the History Channel. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Hill Goodspeed.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation of the Naval Institute to be here to serve as the moderator of this panel, and thank you very much to the panelists that we've assembled today to come here. It's always a pleasure to visit Annapolis and the U.S. Naval Academy because this institution is a chapter in my family's history because my father-in-law arrived here in 1964 as a member of the class of 1968. And when the time came for him to choose his career path, he selected marine aviation. His service taking him to the cockpit of an F-4 Phantom in Vietnam, and then to one of the first Marine Harrier squadrons. And in making that decision to pursue Wings of Gold, he joined the long line that came before him and led the way for those that followed, including members of the audience here in the form of the midshipmen. During the 1920s and 1930s, when naval aviation was in its developmental years, the battleship ruled the seas. Junior officers faced the decision whether to go black shoe or brown shoe, a choice for the latter meaning adventure in the clouds and a revolutionary type of warfare that was unproven in an engagement at sea at that time. As we know from history books, the epic battles at places like Coral Sea, Midway, and the Philippine Sea confirm naval aviation's prominent place in naval warfare, and it has been the tip of the spear ever since. Now, over 100 years after the Navy procured its first airplane, there's a headline on the cover of a recent issue of Smithsonian Air and Space magazine that asks the question, "The End of Combat Pilots?" And the defense analyst commenting on the recent debt ceiling debates affecting the Department of Defense had this to say, "The era of manned airplanes should be seen as over. The problem is nobody wants to give up the previously agreed on platforms." So what then does the future hold for today's midshipmen who aspire to wear the wings of gold? Will they wage war in front of the screen, or will some missions require that they strap into a cockpit and venture into dangerous skies to perform a rescue or provide close air support? And to discuss these issues, we have these distinguished panelists with me, and they are going to start off, each of them making a statement, some opinions about what they view as the future with respect to UAVs, and I'll start with Professor Barney Rubel.
Thanks, Alan. Like everybody, picture in your mind. Has everybody seen Star Wars, especially the first one that came out in '78? All right. Remember Luke Skywalker and his X-Wings fighter? All right. Well, who was in back? R2-D2, the droid. We single-seat drivers took great joy in that that image of the automated NFO in the back. And when we got the Hornet, our suspicions were confirmed. We had an automated droid helping us in that airplane. But if you look at it, if you step back and look at it, what you see is as unmanned vehicles get greater autonomy, the fact is we're automating the pilot, and the human in the loop is going to be the NFO, or the analog. I bring this up only to say we tend to like to take things like new technology we don't understand and fit them into patterns we are familiar with and comfortable with. And in fact, the title of this panel, "What Will Tomorrow's Midshipmen Be Flying?" is kind of an example of that. You may not be flying anything, you're going to be managing systems. As Colonel Huber here is going to tell you, it's kind of a point-and-click world. So, if you look at some of the Navy's new unmanned programs, like the BAMS, Broad Area Maritime Surveillance System, and the X-47, which you may have read about, that flying Dorito chip that is supposed to operate off the carriers. Those are unmanned versions of manned aircraft. The BAMS is kind of like a unmanned P-8 or a P-3. The X-47 is an unmanned version of the F-18 or the F-35. They put X-47 electronics in an F-18 recently and brought it aboard the carrier hands off, all right? So this is an example of slotting unmanned vehicles into manned vehicle pigeonholes, categories. My job is to help the CNO define the future Navy. And so one of my concerns is that we don't fail to take full advantage of new technologies because we try to cut and fit and put them into categories that we're comfortable with. In that vein, I just want to talk for a minute about ships. What will UAVs allow us to do with ships that we haven't been able to do in the past or we could do now? How do we free our minds on this? I got an article in the current Naval War College Review that's come out on the future of aircraft carriers, and one of the ways I try to analyze it, to try to take a unemotional, analytic, clinical approach to it, is to explore the doctrinal roles of carriers over the years. They've been used as capital ships in the Battle of Midway. They've been used as cavalry, just the way Nathan Bedford Forrest used cavalry in the Civil War. They were used in hit-and-run raids all over the Pacific in World War II. They've been used as geopolitical chess pieces that moving around. Where are the carriers? And of course, most recently and most ubiquitously as airfields at sea. And UAVs can probably augment, be a force multiplier in some of these roles, but I think there's a new role, or a new old role, that the carrier could perform because of the unique capabilities of UAVs, and that's eyes of the fleet. That was the first doctrinal role of aircraft carriers. The planes are supposed to go up and scout and spot battleship shot. What if we had real long range and endurance UAVs that could be launched and provide battle network relay services? If we go to war with a capable opponent, you know they're going to start taking out our satellites, they're going to start jamming, they're going to start intruding in our networks. We're going to have a local network that's line of sight and that's robust and that can keep operating through all that. And these UAVs could form relays, kind of pseudo-satellites. I suppose they could launch from land, but without going into all the details, it's better to have local bases, and the carrier would be that local base. So the carrier could perform kind of an eyes of the fleet function, something new that UAVs would allow. All right, that's enough on the carrier. How about other kinds of ships? Let's talk about LHDs and LHAs. I saw a picture of a trailerable catapult that is used to launch UAVs, and you use catapults so that you can get a larger airplane with a heavier load airborne in a shorter distance. Well, UAVs don't have the human factors issues, so why not crane aboard a couple of these trailerable catapults on an LHA, and they could put larger UAVs with more of a load into the air than they could otherwise. And if you have something like that, I mean, you got to figure out how to recover them. But the LHA starts looking kind of CV-like in nature now, and maybe this whole issue of large, small carriers takes on a whole new coloration. And what about some old concepts that could be made new again? They didn't work out the first time because of technology limitations. Let's talk about the Macon and the Akron, the two big dirigibles that the Navy had, which carried their own air wing. They were flying aircraft carriers, and they had this incredible skyhook that the biplane fighter would come up and latch onto it and get trained up. And it actually worked, but we lost both of them in storms at various times. What about, maybe not blimps, but why couldn't you puke out a bunch of UAVs from an open ramp of a C-130 or a C-17 and maybe even recover some of them? What about that? The nice thing about that, I think, is you could get into the fight smaller UAVs from a longer distance than you could otherwise. What about son of Arapaho? Arapaho was an old Cold War concept where we were going to put a containerized aviation detachment aboard a container ship, and then put a flight deck, a platform there to operate either helos or Harriers, and it would kind of turn a convoy ship. This is the old reinforced Germany days when we were going to convoy stuff. It would turn a container ship into an escort. ASW helos, all that kind of stuff. Well, what about this? Why not leverage UAVs and put them aboard container ships? What could we do with that? The son of I-400. The I-400 was a Japanese submarine that had they put this tubular big hangar on the deck of the sub and folded the wings of the biplane, put it inside, float plane. And the idea was they were going to get close to the United States surface, unfold the wings, and launch it and drop some bombs on the United States. That's the only way they could get close. We're already kind of doing this with our SSGNs. We've run some experiments at the War College on all this for the submarine community. But what if we containerized a wing of UAVs? You got 155 tubes available to you on an SSGN. All of a sudden, you got a form of a submersible aircraft carrier. And you could probably do the same thing with DDGs, and dare I say it, on the San Antonio class LPDs, they've already got provisions set up forward to put in a VLS farm, vertical launch system farm. You could put a whole host of UAVs up there without having to do a ship halt or anything, and turn that thing into something other than just an LPD. These are just a few ideas I'm throwing out there just to say that if we don't limit ourselves to thinking of UAVs as unmanned versions of strike fighters or P-3s or even helos. Boeing's got this cool Hummingbird thing that could do cargo lift. And I was thinking, remember, you were with us out in the IO in that 1980 cruise, Admiral? We were rocking away out there for 8 months. No airhead except for DGAR, and we're 1,800 miles away. The only thing that kept us alive was the US-3 carried high priority maintenance parts into us. What if we had a UAV? The range wouldn't be a problem, and you could turn these into long-range, high-priority cargo things if you don't have a airhead reasonably close. So if we just open our minds and think outside the box, as it were, beyond just unmanned versions of current manned aircraft, I think the Navy can really make some money on these things. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Dave Baronic. I'm a retired commander. I was an F-14 radar intercept officer, joined the fleet in 1981. That's when I did my first squadron. And in order to, first fleet squadron tour, to give people a little perspective on the UAV situation, I'd like to point out a couple of things that I did when I was preparing for this. One is in December 2001, the President was cheerleading unmanned combat aircraft systems, talking about how important they were, how useful they were in the brand new conflict in Afghanistan, and how they were going to revolutionize military aviation very soon. Around the same time, Congress set a goal that a third of the deep strike aircraft would be unmanned by 2010, which was last year. I don't think we're there yet. I mean, I did a little research on the web, and unless that's a really well kept secret, I don't think we're there. So my point is that politicians and the media like to take these concepts, and they take bad ones a lot of times too, but these good concepts, and they just go run off with them full speed in one direction. And I can summarize my response to that in one word: cautious progress. I guess that's 2 words. Okay, cautious progress. Obviously, as Professor Rubel commented, unmanned aircraft have a lot of potential, and they've shown a lot of potential. But when I think of implementing these major changes like this, it reminds me of the F-4 Phantom. And when it was being developed, guided missiles were all that we would need, and so the Phantom did not have a gun in its basic design. And a few years later, Navy Phantom pilots over Vietnam were ruing the fact they didn't have a gun, and the Air Force installed a gun in their Phantom. So virtually all new systems have an Achilles heel and are going to have a rocky development process. There's going to be dead ends. There's going to be things that are envisioned. We go back and look at the past 20 or 30 years of artist concepts of new weapon systems, and how many of those either don't happen or don't do what they expected. But then look at these systems that do get fielded, and after a few years they're used in ways that were not foreseen. And again, this is something else that the professor commented. If we get UCADs, unmanned combat aerial vehicles, or unmanned vehicles out there, we put them in the hands of the fleet for a few years, and you're going to see innovation. Why don't we do it this way? Why don't we modify that? And we can really make these resources useful. In terms of the question, what are midshipmen going to be flying? I think it's going to be your children that really fly more UAVs. That's just my fearless prediction. I don't see it happening as fast as a lot of the media or the visionaries predict or hope. A few of the reasons are that they still have some very important some shortcomings, Achilles heels, and you've talked about some of them already. One is the comm link. That's a challenge. We see a lot of the promise of UAVs in our recent permissive environment experience. But will the next opponent be permissive in any of the regimes of war, land, sea, or air? And so, of course, we have to plan for the worst case. And it's in my current job as a defense contractor, it's something that we're wrestling with every day. People want to preserve the lessons of the past 10 years of conflict, which has been largely irregular warfare or low-intensity conflict. It's not low intensity for the guys on the ground, but in terms of nation war, it's low intensity. But then there's a large proponent that says, hey, we have to be ready for a next well-organized, conventional, large-scale war. And I think this also mirrors our are issues with unmanned aerial vehicles. Yes, they can bring a lot of capabilities, but they also have some incredible, some very important, profound limitations. Just a couple more comments. One is you talk about them being suitable for certain missions, and I also think that some routine missions where we don't expect aircraft to go in harm's way, such as logistics, are maybe some easy early victories. Of course, everyone's proposing, or a lot of the most ambitious proposals are for aircraft to go in, unmanned aircraft to go into combat, but those are going to also require overcoming the biggest challenges. A couple of things that you hear about are the low cost associated with unmanned vehicles, but I think it's very important to read exactly what they're comparing. Yes, the cost of a Reaper or a Predator is tiny compared to an F-18 or an F-16, but that's nowhere near the total cost, total ownership cost to the United States taxpayer of either system. So that's really a spurious argument. So you've got to consider total cost. And we've talked about the communications link limitations, and I think you're going to talk more about some of those limitations also. One of the final things that I take away with, as I said, I was an F-14 RIO, radar intercept officer. Luckily, the R2-D2 did not take that seat until after I got my 2,600 hours of F-14 time. But I liken, and I've never flown an unmanned vehicle, but I liken it to operating an F-14 simulator. And I got to tell you, I don't really say this very much in public, and Hinch or some of the other F-14 RIOs or your pilots would say the same thing. When I went into the simulator at Miramar, I don't care how demanding or complicated the scenario was, I never got beat up. It's like I'm sitting in a room, I'm not going to get killed here. But if you get into that jet, you don't man up scared. But there's times when you are in the air in certain missions and you are focused. And I never got that focus when I was in the simulator. So I think that is something that we've got to train our unmanned operators. They've got to feel like their skin is in that plane. And maybe they do this now, but I think it's something that's very important. They cannot go in there thinking that this is expendable. Oh, if it crashes, we launch another one, whatever. We can't afford to lose them that often. When we send them on missions, they're probably going to be the most important missions. And when you have to change a mission or when the conditions get the worst, those are the most important missions. Everything works when it's a blue sky, clear day, and wow, that's awesome. But when you've got to get it done, conditions are bad, that's when it's most important to have a well-trained air crew and a capable airplane. And I think that my caution is that as we make our evaluations, as we look at the promise, as we make our decisions, we've got to consider the worst case, because that's when it's most important. In terms of missions we assign them, in terms of system capability, in terms of crew training, and whether we can have a person sitting on the ground or lead them in the plane to get the mission accomplished. Thanks, Hill.
Thank you. Very insightful comments. And now we'll go to the front lines of one of our panelists has actually commanded unmanned aerial vehicle squadron on the front lines in Operation Enduring Freedom. So, Colonel Huber, you bring some unique perspectives to it. So what's going on in current operations with UAVs?
Well, sure. Good morning. Lieutenant Colonel Mike Huber. I'm the commanding officer of VMU 2, a unmanned aerial vehicle squadron in Cherry Point, North Carolina. Before I start to sell you on some of the things that unmanned aerial systems bring to the fight today, I will tell you that I spent the first 17 years of my time in the Marine Corps flying the AV-8B Harrier, and I had the opportunity to fly it in a number of environments. I got to fly off the front end of the ship, carrying ordnance, supporting the grunts on the ground, dropping bombs in Iraq, and so I saw war fighting from the man perspective, and in some environments where it was very, very challenging from the perspective of manned aviation. One of the environments that was really challenging flying the AV-8 was over a town called Crick. I was the strike coordination and reconnaissance lead for that mission. I had a number of airplanes stacked up with all kinds of bombs, and we had targets aplenty on the ground. Iraqi artillery, we had known troop concentrations, vehicles, tanks, and we were ahead of the front line of troops, so we were out there, what you call blinking targets, and it was a nice place to be with a very effective targeting system. But the challenge was, and Admiral mentioned this, that you're talking about vulnerability periods and how much time on station you have to actually execute that mission. And so I had all kinds of planes out there that were supporting Hornets, Eagles, F-16s, everybody loaded up with bombs, but I had a very small window of opportunity to locate the targets that we were going to employ against, and then to coordinate strikes on those targets, just based on gas. And my mission was to go to the tanker, get some more gas, come back, strike coordination reconnaissance. The persistence that you find on the battlefield with a UAS is tremendous. When I've got 5 to 6 hours time on station with the current air vehicle we're flying in Afghanistan, the RQ-7B Shadow, I can develop situational awareness over the battlefield in concert with communicating with the air controllers on the ground and the Marines that are executing operations forward. I can develop a tremendous amount of situational awareness, and I have the persistence that allows me to integrate very closely with the other aircraft that are coming in those 1.5-hour bowls, whether it's off of the big deck CV or Harriers or Hornets flying out of Kandahar Airfield. And so as they come in, we're ready to pass targets and prosecute targets very rapidly and make their time on station effective. And then allow them to flow back to the tanker while we continue to generate target sets and again support those troops that are on the ground. So I think there are a number of areas that UAS can be very, very effective. But I would say that it is certainly in a complementary role in the world of manned aviation right now, rather than a one or the other. The other thing that's really interesting or exciting about where UAS is going now is the pace of change. And Dave mentioned, there are certainly times when we have to be cautious as we're moving forward, but the pace that technology is changing right now, the world of aviation, I think that there are wonderful opportunities that allow us to bring capability to the battlefield in the unmanned world much quicker than we get it to the battlefield in the manned world. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And certainly anybody that has experience in the world of testing aircraft certainly knows that the rigor that we put into testing new systems on a manned aircraft creates a window of time that it takes a while to get new capability developed and brought to the battlefield. In the short time that I've been around UAS, the pace of change in this community is eye-watering. The deployment prior to mine in Afghanistan that was flying the Shadow flew a completely different sensor capability than in the deployment that I went forward on. So as I'm forward deployed, the deployment prior had a sensor that was solely dedicated to as an eyeball in the sky. So a FLIR, forward-looking infrared, an EO camera, and that was it. It was basically up there to look and communicate and certainly help with the forces on the ground. The sensor that was integrated on Shadow as I was forward was a completely different sensor that had the same EO/IR capability, but we also had a laser designator capability, we had an infrared marker, and a laser rangefinder. So now I can generate in very rapid fashion target location error coordinates with very low target location error that allow me to put some of those precise weapons on targets very quickly within the sensor that's equipped on the Shadow. The next time that I go forward in April, so it's pretty high pace in the Marine Corps. We've got 3 active UAS squadrons, and there's one on the ground all the time. The next time I go forward, we'll have a newer capability that's built around the baseline Shadow. So I'll go from a 5.5-hour airplane up to 9 hours. I will, with a bigger wing, longer time on station. We'll have an improved communications capability that allows us to communicate UHF, VHF, or SATCOM. That allows us to better integrate with other manned aircraft that are flying in the same environment that we are, as well as with those air officers and joint terminal air controllers that are on the battlefield. And shortly thereafter, the squadron that comes out to replace me will have a weapon hanging on the Shadow. So the pace that the community is changing is very, very rapid. Capability to support the fight that we're in now, and I do absolutely agree that we are looking at low-end warfare right now. The allowable risk is not such that the risk to those aircraft that are flying over the battlefield is pretty low, but there is risk, and it's something that we're certainly concerned about. But the last thing I'll leave you with is that although it is a point-and-click world, and I am not sitting in the cockpit flying over the battle space that the Hornets or the Harriers or, that are in the same fight that I'm in are flying over. I will tell you that my air crew, and we do call it an air crew, is very, very engaged and very, very tied in with all those forces that are out there on the battlefield. And there's nothing that happens in the execution of a mission that does not involve very conscious and careful thought about what's going on in the battlefield and how well that I can support the Marines that are engaged in combat out there. We fly directly overhead during patrols. We fly overhead during, unfortunately, during CASEVAC. We go out and patrol ahead of our mounted and dismounted convoys, looking for IEDs, looking for insurgents. We develop positive ID on insurgents that are out there and ensure that those insurgents are eliminated to reduce the risk on our Marines that are out there on the battlefield, and we're overhead watching them. So we take it very, very seriously. We work with an aircrew concept. We do crew coordination just like you do in a manned aircraft as we put our team together and operate. So I will tell you that although it's not sitting in a cockpit, and I'll tell you today, I would just as soon go climb back in the single seat of an AV-8 and go fly that mission overhead of the Marines on the battlefield. What we're doing in the unmanned realm is very similar in many ways to what our manned crews are doing in support of our Marines and soldiers on the battlefield.
Thank you, Colonel. As we launch further into discussion, I'd just like to, y'all are all veterans of hundreds of hours in the cockpit. And look ahead, and you alluded to the fact that UAVs will have a role, but there is going to be a role for manned platforms. So look ahead 5-10 years. What types of missions in naval aviation do you think are still going to require the pilot in the cockpit on the scene?
I'm going to be participating in another symposium like this, I think in January, out at the PG school, which is going to revolve around the ethics of unmanned systems. And the question in my mind is where exactly do we have to have moral agency when we pull the trigger, when we undertake to kill somebody. I'm an old safety officer and had the dubious honor of investigating any number of Class Alpha accidents, fatal ones. And what you find when you do accident investigation, you work backwards and you try to find the chain of events that linked up to cause the accident. And of course, the safety business is trying to preemptively break those chains so that the mishap doesn't occur. Well, I kind of look at moral agency and unmanned systems in the same way. If we have some kind of robotic aircraft, and Norman Friedman's going to talk to you more this afternoon, I think, about swarms and things. How is it if you're an investigator, how could this happen? How did we take out a wedding party, for example, instead of a group of insurgents? And you look your way back and try to form up that chain. How will you be able to assign responsibility, culpability for the mistaken loss of life? And so sometimes one of the guys that used to work for me in our wargaming department is now CAG out there, has been flying missions in both, has flown them in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he's absolutely convinced that in certain cases you got to have a human there in the cockpit to make the moral decision to kill somebody on scene. And I've got no reason to disagree with him on that. So as we go forward, figuring out, exactly how much automation we need, how much, what mix of manned and unmanned systems we have, we must keep in mind moral agency. Where is that decision taken to go there, shoot them? And I think sometimes it's got to be local, and it may be a human in the cockpit, or it may be an unmanned vehicle operator manager in the local area. I know the Air Force Predator guys are sitting there at Nellis doing things long distance, but I got a feeling that one day we're going to have an E2 looking like thing that's not doing airborne early warning, but it launches from the carrier and does local unmanned systems control, because you need humans closer to the scene of action. So that's my feeling, is that where are the moral decisions made about who gets killed, who gets shot at?
I think, if I may, one thing I need to say is that based on Colonel Huber's remarks, I think I need to pay more attention when I was in the simulator, because I should probably, you guys are focused on the mission even though you're not in the cockpit, so all right. But what I think we can do is, and I'm sure they're doing this, is a mission analysis of what do all the carrier-based airplanes do, and land-based planes, what do they do with their flight hours? A lot of my flying hours, when we weren't patrolling off the coast of Iran, escorting tank or waiting on a tanker escort back then, or enforcing, that was way back in the 80s, we used to do tanker escort through the Strait of Hormuz. And it was pretty exciting for the time. And then enforcing the no-fly zone or whatever, but a lot of the flight time was training, deployed or back in the United States. So if you put an autonomous system out there, either autonomous or remotely piloted, they could probably do the mission more with less training. So there's probably going to be it's going to be a math or a multiplication, a multiplicative effect. So if you reduce the number of manned systems, you reduce by a much greater amount the amount of flying you can do. But if you did an inventory of all the missions that all the planes do, you could probably identify some that need to be handled by unmanned and surveillance. I think something else is a concept that's been mentioned here, and that is using unmanned systems as force multipliers. Single man system with unmanned wingmen. that are somehow controlled, provide a greater threat sector, provide confusion to the enemy, greater numbers at low cost. So like has been said, it's not going to be, for a long time, I don't see it being an either or, but applying unmanned systems as aids to our existing manned systems.
You know, I think there's some that are clearly missions that are going to be manned. I tell you, I'm not going to go climb in the back of an unmanned assault support aircraft and go fly into a zone anywhere. And I don't think there's a Marine out there that's going to sign up to doing that. So the Marines that are flying the NV-22s and the CH-53s, and they're taking Marines into to very contested, dangerous landing zones, that's going to be a mission that's left to manned aviation, certainly. When we come back and start talking about pointy nose missions, I think that the Forward Air Controller Airborne is a mission that right now UAS is not ready to assume. I think that there's potential, and depending on the type of close air support that we're talking about, whether we're talking about Type 3 close air support that is not as quite closely integrated as you will see in a Type 1 or Type 2 close air support environment, that perhaps unmanned can get to at a point in time with the right training program that will sustain it over time. But the reality is right now, and for the foreseeable future, Forward Air Control Airborne, closely integrated with the maneuver element on the ground, and as the right-hand man for that joint terminal air controller on the ground, that is a mission that will be accomplished by manned aviation. Certainly UAS can be complementary, and certainly UAS could be the system that's employing the weapon that's called for in that CAS-9 line. But for right now, I think that FACA is certainly one of those missions that will be held by the
Well, I think it's important you also mentioned the helicopter side of it. I mean, NAS Pensacola is near Whiting Field, where all Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard helicopter pilots are trained, so I've gotten to know a number of them over the years, and that seems to be a mission where they want to do a hot LZ or hovering over in a search and rescue scenario. You know, when you need a rescue swimmer in the door, go out and pull someone to safety, that's going to require manned platforms. And you know, in this day and age, the helicopter, rotary wing aviation, and naval aviation is becoming more and more prominent and numerous, given the number of missions that they perform. Y'all touched upon an element of the UAV debate, which is, David mentioned it, the public opinion, people really outside the uniformed military and military community, seizing upon this concept and really advancing it far ahead. And so my question is, and also we have the recent, we're going through economic times, and it's going to be hitting the Defense Department a lot more than it has in past years. What degree does that the public perception of UAVs and their capabilities, and also the economic situation we face as far as debt reduction that's in Congress now, do you think that will drive maybe the UAV to be pushed at a quicker pace than it really it's capable of at this time, or that it's justified?
Well, certainly the per unit cost of UAVs is, I believe, significantly less than manned counterparts. And I'm not talking just Predators and things like that, Scan Eagles, things like that have really no manned counterpart. But I don't know. I don't have the projected cost figures for the X-47, for example. But I got to believe it's less. Anything's less than the F-35 development effort. But there probably will be pressure. It isn't so much that UAVs are cheap, it's just that manned systems have become so darn expensive, and it takes so long to develop and look at the gestation period of the F-35. It's, I remember I was an old A7 guy, and I think the A7A went from an idea to flying in about less than a year, and hit the fleet not all that long after that. I was outraged at those things costing $4 million a piece. Our 8 trusty little A4s were $500,000. So yeah, it's just that for whatever reason, manned aircraft are so darn expensive to develop. UAVs are inevitably going to be cheaper.
Politicians are in the business of looking good, and I think getting reelected is one of their, it's high on the list of most of their priorities. And so if they can pursue a program that they can claim saves money, then we've got to be careful. And that's what the services, that's what the services, congressional liaison offices and things like that, they guard against that, and they lobby for the program that does the mission best. But like you said, these times put pressure on people to save money, and so that's going to, if there's a decision, that's going to weigh in the pro-unmanned system side. And so we've got to all be careful about that, and services have to be careful about that.
I would just say that cost certainly is going to be a driver as we talk about procurement of new systems and capabilities that we can bring to the battlefield. I think that public perception, while it may weigh on the lawmakers as they look to procure new things, I mean, the driver's going to be where the money comes from and how much money there is out there and how much capability you can buy for that money to answer the mission that you're tasked with, whether you're flying off a ship or flying off a dirt. So, for bang for your buck, there certainly is capability that you get out of UAS, and the pace that the technology is coming to the forefront for the dollar amount that you're spending. It's hard to beat. It's hard to argue against in many cases. So it all comes back to the hard chargers at the Pentagon writing the requirements, but you got to take a hard look at what your requirement is and see how you're going to answer that mail with the amount of money that you have to spend at the end of the day. So.
Hill, this just came to me, and something that the Colonel said. Has anyone done a survey or looked at either new people's desire to willingness to fly unmanned aerial systems, UAVs, or to look at retention? And do you think the Navy's going to have to do that? We all love flying airplanes, and a lot of people in the audience loved it, but retention was so bad that they had to start paying huge bonuses to make fighter pilot and fighter RIO retention at acceptable numbers. So what's going to happen if people want to operate UASs, or are they going to have to force people to go into that line of work? And I'm asking this question, I have not seen that, but you may know. And two, are we going to have a high turnover in those units?
Well, I don't think any study's been done, but I think we have a captive audience that can shed some light on it. So any midshipmen in here, show of hands, how many of you came to the academy or are looking for a career in naval aviation? And any of you, can you share any, what is your desire? When you come in, when you graduate and go through flight training, wear those wings of gold, what appeals to you about naval aviation? And have you thought about this future of the changing ways of flying as far as unmanned aerial vehicles? Anybody have any comment they want to make on that?
Third midshipman, third class gay. I want to go to naval aviation to be a pilot, not to sit in a room and steer with a joystick.
So just based on that unscientific survey there, the midshipmen here want to get into naval aviation because they want to fly. And I think being in that, there's nothing that's going to replace that feeling of taking off from the ground. Now, granted, I've only done it on Delta, but people I've talked to who have flown, being around naval aviation like I am all the time, it is that is an appeal, and it's been the appeal since T.G. Ellison was naval aviator number 1 back in 1911.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think and a good one. The question was, is there a currency requirement? Do we look at composite squadrons where unmanned aircraft commanders are going to have to spend some amount of time in a cockpit to maintain flying currency and that kind of thing? But I tell you, the current approach for the Marine Corps is a little bit different than the way that the Navy is looking to tackle this problem. And there's probably 100 different ways out there, but I will tell you that the current approach from the Marine Corps perspective, today there's not a primary military occupational specialty that supports being a unmanned aircraft commander, which means that the pool that we choose from to get you to UAS consists of all either single anchor pilots that are coming from the fleet, cross anchor weapon system operators, backseaters, or we have a percentage of unmanned aircraft commanders that come from the air command and control side of the house, the 7200 MOS in the Marine Corps. So all of them come from an aviation background, but there is not a primary MOS that supports it. And I tell you that it's hurting our effort in the Marine Corps right now, because everybody wants to get back to their primary MOS. Everybody wants to go back and climb in the airplane that they learned to fly, that they're brought up to fly, that they're building MOS credibility and career life to fly. Same on the command and control side. Those Marines come and they experience UAS for 2 to 3 years, and then they go back to whether they're out of the Director Support Center or what have you, that controlling aircraft in a combat environment. So that's all about the change, though, in the Marine Corps, and the route that marine aviation is going is to go with a primary MOS that will be cradle to command UAS officers. And so what that means is you will graduate from TBS, you will go and take a course where you actually do some flying. And right now that program is going to be overlaid over top of the same pipeline that the Air Force is putting their UAS pilots through. And then you'll get some follow-on training for the specific type model series UAS that you're going to fly. And then you'll go to the fleet and you will be an MOS carrying UAS aircraft commander for your career. And what that does is that it gives us an opportunity to build experience and longevity within the community, because right now we train some of the best, most capable unmanned aircraft commanders, and then we ship them right back to where they came from, and all of that experience that they gained and knowledge that they had in the world of unmanned aviation disappears. So that is a challenge. I will tell you that some of you, if you go Marine Corps, will more than likely end up as a UAS aircraft commander, and you will do that, and you'll have a primary MOS that supports it.
Yes, sir. The question is about damage and sustainability of unmanned systems.
You know, when we got the Hornet, it's a fly-by-wire airplane, and when you move the stick, you're essentially talking to a computer. As it turns out, the fly-by-wire system has an inherently high damage tolerance capability. We've had some mid-air reports that have resulted in the loss of a substantial portion of a wing, of nose, tail, etc. And it's kind of an inherent characteristic of fly-by-wire that it automatically compensates for that kind of thing. And they were able to bring Hornets back with damage that other airplanes, you know, maybe the old B-17s could get back with it. But I mean, it was impressive to me to see the amount of structural damage a Hornet is able to sustain and still get back, because the mission computer doesn't, not the human. The Hornet itself is unflyable if the flight control computers don't work. It's got negative dynamic stability. Well, UAVs are inherently fly-by-wire. That's by definition, and so they're to some degree quite naturally going to be able to sustain damage and come back. At least as well as a Hornet can now, because the human in the Hornet is dependent on the mission, on the flight control computers to get it back. So, for whatever that's worth.
Just one comment, and certainly some of the systems that we're currently flying right now are very, very, while it is a computer algorithm that flies and decides the best profile to fly the system in, if you were to hit it with any sizable AAA or a surface-to-air missile or anything like that, it would be the end of the day for a Shadow, that's for sure. But I will tell you that because of its size, because of its radar cross-section, and because of the heat signature that the UAS produces in an unclassed environment, it's pretty darn survivable because you can't see it, and it's very, very difficult to engage. So it really depends on how much we're going to, all the cost drivers and that kind of thing, how much you're going to invest in the survivability of the specific system, and it really comes down to, again, allowable risk and that kind of thing, decisions that the commander will have to make before you launch into a certain environment.
If I might, just to add, we've been running war games up at the Naval War College now for 125 years, but over the past 10 years, we have included unmanned systems in these war games. One of the things I noted since the late 90s, when we have blue commanders, we give them unmanned systems, they seem to be as risk averse with the unmanned systems as they are with manned systems for whatever reason. They don't seem to see them as expendable, and I think the issue is not so much whether there's a human there, which is not insignificant, but the fact is it's a capability that you lose at least for a little while when that thing gets taken out. So especially if it's a high-end thing like a Global Hawk or BAMs in the future, you're still not going to have hordes of these things. They're going to be relatively scarce assets, and so you have to regulate the risk that you subject them to accordingly, because at least for the time it's out of action, if Sam shoots one down, you're blind in that area for a while until you can put another one out there. So you just can't consider them throwaway things.
Got time for one more question, I believe. Yes, sir.
I was interested if there is a concept of synthetic situational awareness, the same way they would either talk about situational awareness. When they're in the cockpit, can we achieve or have we achieved the equivalent all-around awareness capability of what's happening? That would be important, especially if we get into the general war, future estimates, potential slow threat, radiation
Well, again, this is something we've been experimenting with up at the college too. I mean, not with electronics, but with things like K-Web and ways to generate greater degrees of situational awareness. You know, the real question is, if you're talking about machine awareness, that's autonomy. Norman's going to probably talk about that later today. If the question is where, you know, to what degree of situational awareness does the relevant human being in the loop have? Yeah, that's a relevant issue, and I mean, I think you can probably generate higher degrees of it with unmanned vehicles because of the sensor arrays you can put on them. The Admiral said, remember, the F-4F pilots couldn't see out the back, so Thatch developed the weave. That was to increase their SA so that they knew whether or not there was a zero undertaking. You know, part of the problem is if you're using a UAV, in some cases you're looking at the world through a soda straw, and that's a problem. But it's clearly possible to, with new kinds of sensors, to generate a more 360-degree awareness. I mean, SA is good, and more of it's better. But where exactly in the system it occurs is important. Now, if you look at the Gerald Ford class carrier, I had a brief on that a while back, and I can't remember the exact number, but their bandwidth on that carrier is like 16 or 32 times what it is on the Nimitz class. And I'm going, holy cats, why is that? Because control signals for UAVs don't chew up much bandwidth. That SCADA link is low bandwidth. Well, what's all the bandwidth for? And it's for raw video. All right. If we have to generate situational awareness using raw video, we're probably shooting ourselves in the foot. And again, Norman Friedman's written a very good book on all this on unmanned systems, and so we're going to have to figure out other ways of generating SA other than raw video, which chews up all our bandwidth.
Just quickly, right now you are looking through the soda straw, and so the essay that you generate is certainly based on where you're looking, but also based on communication with those forces that are on the ground that are right in the middle of the fight. I think there are capabilities that are coming, wide area airborne surveillance systems that will give you a bigger look at the ground. You certainly don't have the ability, if somebody's shooting at you from your six or off your wingtip, you can look over there, but unless you have something that cues you to that, fire's coming from that particular direction, you don't have that essay. So it's a challenge. You tend to build essay over based on time over the battlefield with persistence and those kinds of things. You learn what the threat level is anybody trying to shoot at us, that kind of thing. But you don't have the instantaneous essay that certainly you have when you're sitting in the cockpit and you can look around. That's an absolutely valid point. It's something that as we look to those higher end threats and scenarios, that perhaps is something that you will need to make the investment in, if that's going to be the route that we're going to go in that type of thing.
On behalf of all the panelists here, I want to thank you very much for your attention, and thank you all three panelists for your insights, and appreciate it very much.